Championship Monday, everybody. Welcome to my car, my Gregoire Chambon Nissan, on this Monday, November 20th, 2023, in the aftermath of the Montreal Alouettes, for the 8th time in the history of their organization, captured the Grey Cup and did so in incredible fashion, in shock the world, upset fashion. It really began, I think, if we go back to the game, obviously, in the East Final against the Toronto Argonauts after Montreal handled their business with relative ease, taking on the Hamilton Tiger Cats and really having no problem there in the East semifinal at Molson Stadium a few weeks ago. Fast forward to the East Final against Toronto, clearly embarrassing Argonauts quarterback Chad Kelly, creating 9 different turnovers. And remember, the Montreal Alouettes went into that East Final in Toronto against an Argonauts team that had won 16 regular season games in an 18-week season. They went 16-2. And Montreal struggled all year long, until they did it. How did they do it? How did a team like the Alouettes, who went 11-7 before the playoffs began and lost every single time they played BC, every single time they played Winnipeg, and every single time they played Toronto, and not only lost, but lost with emphasis. Lost, remember, for those that perhaps are, checking in and out with regularity, right, on the Montreal Alouettes in the Canadian Football League, not only, did Winnipeg win 14 games, they went 14-4, the Bombers. Good enough, obviously, to get them to the West Division Final, get them to the Grey Cup for the 4th consecutive year. Did you know that? 4 straight years, Zach Collaros and the Bombers have been to the Grey Cup, and they've won twice. And looking to cement their legacy, their creation of this dynasty in Winnipeg, right? And Montreal played Winnipeg twice, lost to them twice. And not only that, little fun factoid about the Montreal Alouettes regular season series with Winnipeg, they didn't score a single offensive touchdown in those 2 games. And when you put all of that together, regardless of how Montreal looked, right, against Hamilton and how they looked defensively against Toronto, like the Argonauts were clearly, totally, never for a second prepared to deal with Montreal in that East Final. And look, I mean, I said so on the radio at that time. I liked Montreal's chances against the Argos, but I'll admit I didn't think they were going to beat Toronto. And I'll get to my prediction and why I was wrong again in the Grey Cup last night, with the fact that the one thing I gave Montreal the edge over to take it back to the East Final over Toronto was the Argonauts had more or less put it in cruise control for the final 6 games of their regular season. They played a lot of meaningless football, and it's very, very difficult. I think I've learned this and come to appreciate it as I've gotten older, that it's very, very difficult to rev the engine up. And, when you've got it going and you're cruising down the highway and you're doing 115 and everything is moving slowly, and then you come down to this crawl, if not a dead stop, and then you got to get it going again down the tracks. And it's very difficult before you build momentum. And the beauty about professional football, when they get to their playoff tournament, is you've got 60 minutes. You have 4 quarters to be at your best. And if you're not at your best and the other team happens to be at their best, your chances of winning go from slim to pretty much none. And I think that's what happened with Montreal. And it's not the same, I don't think, because, Winnipeg going into the Grey Cup, not only were they the best team in the league at a plus 215 point differential, and they went 14-4, but they were so layered, the Bombers, right? Not only, and we talked about it already, 4 straight appearances in the Grey Cup. That in itself is quite the accomplishment. And then we talk about Oliveira coming out of the backfield. We could talk about Lawler Jr. as the primary target for Zach Collaros, who in of himself is an upper echelon creme de la creme quarterback in the Canadian Football League. So that's what I talk about when I say Winnipeg went into that Grey Cup game against Montreal as 8.5-point favorites for a legitimate reason. They're very, very good. And the Montreal Alouettes, if you've paid attention this season, even going into the playoffs, Cody Fajardo, I'm going to say not once, looked as crisp, as sharp as he did, as efficient, as killer, as ballsy, as gutsy, putting his nuts on the table countless times in that football game. Never once did he look as good as he did. And I got to tip my cap to Cody Fajardo, to Jason Moss, to Noel Thorpe, to Anthony Calvillo, to General Manager Danny Machocha for being the architect of the Grey Cup winning Montreal Alouettes, who came from behind numerous times in that football game yesterday to dispatch of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in a 28-24 final and win the game outright. And for the 8th time in the history of the Montreal Alouettes, are crowned champions. And it's funny because sometimes, so much goes on in our day-to-day lives. We forget, stuff gets filed away. Are we referencing these things all the time? And obviously, being around the Montreal sports scene back in 2000 and seeing the Anthony Calvillo, Mike Pringle, Ben Cahoon, Jamal Richardson, that era of the Montreal Alouettes from 2000 to 2010, under the guidance of Calvillo and Jim Pop and everybody else through the years, through that decade, the Montreal Alouettes from 2000 to 2010 went to the Grey Cup 8 times in a 10-year stretch. And Anthony Calvillo and his guys were crowned champions on 3 of those 8 occasions. And I forgot about that. I forgot about how dominant the Montreal Alouettes were for a consistent 10-year run. And so because I spent some time on Wikipedia yesterday looking at Cody Fajardo's stats, looking at, the Montreal Alouettes. We know it's been 13 years since they last won a Grey Cup, blah, 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 blah. So what's happened since then? Who are the architects? Who are the one and done coaches? We were having some fun, Connor and I, last week going over some of the Alouettes coaches we've had on the show over the years, right? From Tom Higgins to Jacques Chapdelaine, and so many guys have come and gone. And we land on former CFL player, quarterback Jason Moss, who's a regular on the show with McKenna and I every Wednesday at 7:20. And much like Martin St. Louis and the strong assets we believe that MSL has to work with, and why guys respect him and admire him and listen to him when Martin St. Louis talks, is the relatability factor. And, Jason Moss over the course of the season had told McKenna and I a bunch of great anecdotes about building camaraderie, about building chemistry, despite the lack of results, right? Not too many people gave the Owls a shit ton of respect going into the postseason. As I told you already, I didn't pick them to beat Toronto. Breaking news, everybody. I didn't pick them to beat Winnipeg either. All my colleagues at TSN 690 did. I was the only donkey, borderline asshole that picked the non-local team, and I can't help myself. My brain works how it works. And I saw the 8.5 points, and I watch a lot of CFL. I watch the Montreal Alouettes every single week. I believe I have a pretty good read on this team more often than not. And I did say to kind of cover myself a little bit, I thought the Alouettes, like the Toronto game, I thought the points were way out of whack. The 10.5 against Toronto, the 8.5 against Winnipeg was too much. The Owls defense legitimately is that great that it's hard for a team to run away and hide on the Alouettes. And so when I look back on how they accomplished this, man, I gotta give the coach Jason Moss so much credit. And obviously Danny Machocha as the general manager, the architect that brought Jason Moss in. Jason Moss brought in Cody Fajardo, because those two guys, there wasn't a lot of belief around the Canadian Football League with those two guys specifically, and even less belief on Cody Fajardo's ability to be a game-breaking talent, to be this guy that can win Grey Cups, can be a franchise quarterback and a build-around player, so to speak. Fajardo won a Grey Cup as a backup with the Argos years and years ago, and it obviously ended very, very badly for him in Saskatchewan. And it's not like Cody Fajardo comes in and has this cannon arm, gunslinger mentality, is going to go all over the place, burning DBs and safeties for major scores and an aerial assault that never ends. But his ability as an athlete is unquestionable. And certainly the game kind of turns in the second half. Not only does Fajardo be exceptionally efficient with the football in terms of his, 21 of 26, had 3 touchdowns. Cole Speaker got 1. Tyson Philpott obviously was the hero in that game. Austin Mack certainly had a much better performance than he did against Toronto. But look, I mean, he had a standout rookie season and had a standout Grey Cup with 103 receiving yards. Austin Mack did yesterday. It's crazy that the Owls went 2 games, 8 quarters, and didn't score an offensive touchdown against Winnipeg, but went 4 quarters in the biggest game of the season, and the Owls burned him for 3 touchdowns in 4 quarters of play. But if not for Jason Moss's ability to believe, because I do think at this point, when it comes to talking about the pro ranks of athletes and sport, what do these guys look for? How do they get themselves over the hump, right? How do they go from bridesmaids to being the belle of the ball, to being the bride? It's belief. It's finding something credible that you can latch onto, never let go, and use that as fuel, as an accelerator to get you going. And I do believe Jason Moss's belief in Cody Fajardo, considering how it ended, was what this quarterback needed. And it's not like, he reset the record books in the CFL this past season, but he comes across, and I think one of his best assets, other than his ability to run, is bringing people together. And the Montreal Alouettes use that as fuel several times, certainly in the playoffs, and I'm sure they used it during the regular season. Like Jason Moss, the coach of the Owls, understood the importance of team camaraderie, of understanding that after 4 quarters of football, not everyone's hopping into 40 different cabs and going home, right? It's a 45-man roster. 9 guys from Quebec on the Montreal Alouettes. We'll talk about Marc-Antoine Duquois and what he said after the game yesterday. Very passionate rant that aired on RDS that is going viral here in Quebec. We'll talk about that in a second. But the ability to build camaraderie, the ability to build internal belief of when the outside world says, you guys suck, you can't do anything, the internal belief blocks out the outside noise. And so whether it was French classes, excursions together, Jason Moss told us how they built a pickleball court in the dressing room. And when the Owls went to Hamilton to get ready for Grey Cup week, one of the first things the Owls did, backed by their kicker, David Cote, was build up that pickleball court, because that's what they do. And that, one of those bonding things. It works when it works. And clearly, the strategy of finding ways to build up team camaraderie and get a tighter bond obviously worked, because we're talking about the Grey Cup champion Montreal Alouettes for the 8th time in their franchise's history. Because athletes, I do believe, thrive in those environments, because you get to the summit of the mountain of your sport because you're already great, right? Like every player in pro sports, CFL, NHL, otherwise, like I'm going to say 99.9999% of these people were the best player at pretty much every single level they played at, all the way up until they got to the pros. And some of them took that with them. There's the McDavids and the Crosbys of the world that no matter where they go, no matter what levels they reach, they're just going to be the best player. Point final. But sometimes you need edges. Sometimes you need belief. Sometimes you need someone to tell you that, yes, you can. And Marc-Antoine Duquois, and I wish I had the capabilities of playing this audio for you instead of me talking about what he had to say. But, this is a low-level production podcast. I do these Bad Boy in the Car with Stars live. I'm doing this live. This is not tape produced. Slap it on YouTube and Facebook later on. If I fuck up, I fuck up. C'est la vie, right? And so when I think about how the Montreal Alouettes were able to navigate all this, edges are everything. And I do believe Marc-Antoine Duquois, who went off for about 55 seconds on RDS. And if I were him, I would have reacted the same way. There's so much to be said, right, about living in Quebec, the fact that the official language in this province is French, and how unique that is, because every other province in our country's official language in that province is English. And we could pretend that we're a bilingual country, but in reality, Quebec is French, a little bit of English. New Brunswick is mostly English with a little bit of French. It's closer to the Quebec border, and pockets of Ontario, like where Claude Giroux is from, so on and so forth. Pockets of French. But by and large, you get what I'm saying, right? Canada is 90% English, probably higher percentage than that. And Marc-Antoine Duquois and 8 of his guys from Quebec, also the general manager from Quebec, the man who owns the Montreal Alouettes is from Quebec. And they're walking around Hamilton. They're walking around the week of the Grey Cup. And they're like, shit, man, there's really no French here. And the Montreal Alouettes are in the Grey Cup. Like CFL, Ligue Canadienne Football, LCF, even that wasn't even on the field. The French acronym for the Canadian football, even that wasn't even on the field. And they're walking around advertisements and signs to point fans to various excursions and fun activities to do during Grey Cup, all unilingual, all in French, right? And then Marc-Antoine Duquois flips on his program guide because he wants to watch TV, and flips on 1400 on TSN. And what does he see on the program guide? He sees Winnipeg Blue Bombers versus Toronto Argonauts in the Grey Cup. And so all of that adds up. And it boiled over with an epic 55 or so second rant about how nobody believed in the Montreal Alouettes. that there was no French really to be seen until the CFL scrambled Friday and Saturday to get it done right ahead of kickoff by 6:45 on Sunday. And then he brings up the reference to the television guide and more or less says, keep your English. I'm bringing the Grey Cup back home to Montreal, to Quebec, and we're going to celebrate. Woo, he said, ba, 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 right? And does a great job. And some people in Montreal, obviously the Anglophone portion of the people here in Quebec, heard that and took great offense to that. I didn't. I heard Marc-Antoine Duquois as a guy who was more upset with the establishment and the Canadian Football League and the lack of forward thinking, the lack of critical thinking, the lack of deep thought, really, because that's what it is. It was all on the surface. Well, the Grey Cup is in Hamilton, so here you go. Let's roll, regardless of who's there. That it was more about what was going on, the lack of respect from the league as opposed to English versus French, us versus them, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm going to give the player the benefit of the doubt that he used all of that to fuel himself. Obviously, he and his teammates felt tremendously disrespected, ignored, forgotten, looked through, however you choose to describe it, and use that to say, oh, yeah? You just wait. You watch what these Quebecers are going to do. You watch. And he wasn't wrong. So that's how I choose to interpret what Marc-Antoine Duquois had to say as a born and raised Anglophone Quebecer who has spent his entire life here. I, not for a second, got offended at all. I saw a proud guy. I saw a professional athlete that looked for that extra ingredient to get him and his guys over the top. And in that instance, it worked. And, when we watch games like the one we watched yesterday, there's so many events in sports, right? Where doing what I do, where I go on the air and we talk and break down games, X's and O's, and who did this and why did they do that? They win because of, they lose because of, so on and so forth. There are so many times in games where I bookmark moments, or I write it down, I send a note to myself, I try my best to remember it. And there were so many bookmark moments in that Owls come from behind win over Winnipeg yesterday. Cole Speaker obviously was beyond great with his 3 catches for 63 yards. The end of the first half with Jason Moss putting the ball in Caleb Evans' hands and running it back more than once on a first and goal, on a second and goal, on a third and goal, and going QB sneak, and then ultimately Winnipeg stuffing them and then going back down the field and scoring. Knowing that the Montreal Alouettes were getting the ball back to start the second half, I was like, what were you thinking? Why would you take the ball out of your best player's hands? Cody Fajardo was balling. Will Strickland had himself a day. Austin Mack clearly had the sticky on the gloves, and he wasn't dropping really anything. And yet they're running QB sneak after QB sneak when you've got the entire end zone to work with and your guys are moving and they're flowing. And that was a bookmark moment. And I'm not going to lie to you when I tell you that when I saw that, I bookmarked it and said to myself, I'm going to go in tomorrow morning, and this is why the Montreal Alouettes lost this Grey Cup. Bad coaching, bad decision-making, coaching scared, not trying to throw the ball up. And then the second half unraveled. And then the Owls were in a 2nd and 20 situation. And Cody Fajardo does what Cody Fajardo did. And I thank David Naylor for this, who joined McKenna and I at 9 o'clock this morning. Talking about Fajardo's best assets is his escapability. And this guy rushed for almost 4,000 yards on the ground in 4 years at Nevada. And you saw it on the 2nd and 20 where Cody Fajardo picked up 13 yards, losing his legs, to get the Owls to a 3rd and 5. And this was the TSN turning point. Throwing the ball up on 3rd and 5 on a 30-yard pass because the defense was recognized by Philpott, by Fajardo as one-on-one coverage. Philpott recognizes the coverage that leads to the game-winning catch one-on-one, takes advantage of it, and a Canadian kid catches the Grey Cup clinching touchdown, and the Montreal Alouettes roll because of gutsy, educated decision-making, giving yourself and your team the best chance possible to win a football game. And Fajardo said it on the wrap-up with Joey Alfieri on the Montreal Alouettes kind of post-game press conference, podcast, whatever you want to call it. And Fajardo told Joey Alfieri their intention was to leave their nuts on the table. Wow. I mean, I love that. I admire that. I don't know if I would do something if I were in a carbon copy situation. It's the Grey Cup. It's so easy to be conservative. It's so easy to play safe, to play the odds. But that's how you do it, right? That's how you win titles. I'm just in awe. I didn't see it. I didn't predict it. Didn't think it was possible. And obviously, on defense, we could talk about Sean Lemon and how integral this guy was, the glue that brought the defense together all season long. KB and Ento's unbelievably acrobatic, athletic interception in the end zone, stretching his body, his torso, his arms for as far as they could do. I mean, that was big boy football. That was big boy football by the Montreal Alouettes. Full credit for their win. You know, it was just 11-7, a plus 50-point differential, never once recognized as this offensive team to be feared, more about a defensive identity, and they go and they do what they did. And so the parade goes down on Wednesday at 11:30, starting at Crescent, ending at Quartier des Spectacles. And for the 8th time in the history of the franchise, they are crowned Grey Cup champs. So just unbelievable performance. Everybody should be proud, and can't wait to see. And I hope lots of people show up, man. It's been 13 years. 13 years. I don't want to tell you how long it's been since the Montreal Canadiens had a parade in downtown Montreal. Y'all know the answer to that question, so let's not bring that up. Let's stop that here. The Canadiens, by the way, they're in Anaheim tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. Yeah, here's the schedule if you're down for it. Habs at Anaheim tomorrow at 10, in San Jose on Friday at 3, Saturday at the LA Kings at 4, at Columbus on Wednesday of next week at 7 p.m. So that's the Canadian schedule for a team that is still stuck on 2 regulation time wins, a team that got cracked by the Boston Bruins. The Montreal Canadiens went into Boston and gave the Bruins way too much respect and were more than just soft. Happy for Juraj Slafkovsky, who played well, scored again. So he's starting to come around a little bit. Man, this guy's such a raw talent. I'm no expert. I have no idea if he's going to pan out or not. But you can see he's so raw and lots of room to grow. And I hope the Montreal Canadiens have the right people in place to see this guy grow properly. You know, it's amazing from, one game to the next. Josh Anderson's ice time went from 20-29 to 14-11 in a span of 5 games. And in 2 games, Josh Anderson has 1 shot on goal total in his last 2 games. I mean, the guy's pressing, shooter, tutor or not. You got to find a way to get Josh Anderson a goal, right? So that's the Montreal Canadiens schedule. And by the way, having some fun with my dog at home, Hanky. If you go and you check out my, my Twitter or my Instagram, whatever it is, here's a good little life hack for you. I've done this with Hank now a couple of different times. Getting him used to things like we use a gentle lead. It goes around his nose. It prevents him from pulling on walks and stuff like that. It's a great tool. It goes around his nose, and it makes it very difficult for the dog to pull and walk quickly. So you can enjoy your walk if you have an enthusiastic dog, right? And so we got this thing. And so what I would do is I would put the gentle lead around his nose at home and just leave it on. Just leave it. He would go lie on the couch. I'd leave it on for 10 minutes, and then I'd take it off, and I'd do that a bunch of different times. So then when it came time to take him for a walk with this leash on, he'd be like, what is this foreign object? Get this off me. No, it was cool. And so now my new thing is I've got Hank doggy boots. They're called Mutt Lux, like Muck Lux, but Mutt, M-U-T-T, Lux, right? And so I'm sure you've all seen these videos of these doggies. When they get these little boots on, they all walk like oblong, right? Because they can't feel their feet on the ground. It's the funniest thing in the world. It's high entertainment. I could watch it all day long. So I've been putting these Muttlucks on Hank and just letting him walk around the house. And I filmed one on Saturday morning and posted it. It was lots of fun to laugh at Hanky and stuff like that. But it's a great hack to get your dog winter ready. And you know what the best hack of them all is? Getting your dog winter ready at Little Bear. LittleBearOnline.com. You don't have to worry. Chuck and his wife and his staff, this is a locally owned business. They deliver to your address, so you don't even have to venture outside if you don't want to. They'll handle that for you. But when it comes to education on dog toys, on what nutrition is best for your breed of dog or cat. Yes, they're cat people too. Little Bear Online is the trusted authority for all your pet's needs, because it's not like walking into a big box store where like you're going to see one employee who may or may not have any knowledge on dog nutrition. He just works there, is working his hours, punching the clock and making money, right? Different when you go to Little Bear. The owners are there. They're there every day, open 7 days a week. Find them online at Little Bear. littlebearonline.com is their website. They deliver. And again, you can walk through their front door. They're on St. Catherine across the street, St. Catherine and Green Avenue. Walk across the street from Tavern on the Square. Ask for Chuck. Tell him you heard him on In the Car with Star. My dog needs a new toy. My dog's not feeling well. My dog needs new food. My dog's shedding. My dog has dry skin. These are the people to go see. Little Bear Online, proud supporters of In the Car with Star. Enjoy the Grey Cup. Enjoy the festivities. Be proud as Montrealers, French or English. We're all in this together, baby. In the Car with Star. We'll see you later this week.